Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Today we have a little bit of a different setup as I finally decided to do some gouache sketching outside. And we are in a beautiful park in eastern Pennsylvania. It's really close to our house, and my son and I have been visiting that park pretty much every day of the quarantine. And it's quite a busy place, but you can find some quiet spots. I didn't have any expectations for this sketching session, and because if you have any young children, you know what I mean. But I decided to try some plein air gouache sketching because I've never done it before actually, and I didn't even have specific setup for it, so I just threw some supplies in the last minute before we left. We initially just wanted to do some picnic outside, and I thought, why not use that nice sunny day as a nice opportunity to get some plein air sketching done. And my setup actually worked really well for me, so that's why I thought maybe it will work for you because it doesn't require anything fancy. So I used just a black foam board as my support. I've cut it down to the size that I thought would be comfortable for me, that would fit my Moleskine watercolor sketchbook. And I also cut a few sheets of my usual palette paper, and I've taped it to a harder board just to keep it in place. And I had about maybe 10 sheets in there, but I only used one for that painting. And of course some paper towels, and it was a windy day, so I had to tuck it in and secure it and clip it. And for my clips I just used the plastic clips that I found on my son's drawing easel, so they not really that sturdy, but it worked. Here you can see in a picture all the supplies that I took with me that day: a bag with my paints and just usual other supplies like clips and a spray bottle of water. I took my Moleskine watercolor sketchbook and some of my palette paper sheets. I took the Urban Sketchbook Handbook about color just for inspiration, my pencil case, a jar of water, and my foam board. And this is pretty much everything that I took with me because I didn't want to drag too many supplies with me. I knew I would have a limited time on location anyway. So I started with a simple sketch, and I actually took a picture because I wanted to zoom in on the composition. I was going to paint a bridge that I was sitting far away from, and I just wanted to have a closer look. And it's always easier if you take a picture and you sketch from a picture, because that way you don't have to keep track of what you're including and what you're eliminating from what you see in front of you. So I'm sketching just with a regular graphite pencil, and even though I'm gonna be covering up all of the pencil marks in the future once I start painting, it helps me to just establish the composition and sort of remember for the future where everything goes. And sometimes I go a little bit more detailed, sometimes I keep it fairly abstract just to the basic shapes, but I always start with a horizon line and just the basic direction if I have any in that painting. And here I had the body of water, the river, as my main direction. Even though I didn't see much of it, it was kind of disappearing behind the overlapping sides on the right. So I didn't really have that much of the movement in my composition. But having a pencil sketch helped me anyway. And I usually tape the corners of my sketch just out of habit. And here are the paints that I use for the painting. It's a titanium white, Naples yellow, lemon yellow, permanent yellow, deep yellow ochre, what is it, phthalo blue, sap green, raw umber, burnt sienna, red ochre, and lilac. I'm also gonna add a little bit of the Prussian blue later in the painting because I was missing some of the deep, rich, dark color. I started with premixing my greens, and I wanted to keep the painting very light, and it was sort of those light green colors that you see in the springs before the foliage fully develops. I like to start usually with the midtones, but in this case it was sort of on the highlight side. And if you know my style of painting, you know that I usually start from one side, which I develop, and then move on to another one. And here I was kind of going back and forth and just trying a little bit of the different approach for this painting. I was struggling a little bit with the paint drying really fast. Like every few minutes I had to remember to spray because I usually like to go back to some of my mixes and incorporate them in other mixes, and here everything was just drying up so fast, which was good for the painting because it was easier to layer on top of other colors, but I just had to remind myself to continuously spray my palette. The greens, I was just kind of going for variety in there. I wasn't copying directly what I saw in front of me because there was just so much, and I already had about 100 shades of green on my palette anyway. So I'm not trying to copy what I see in front of me exactly. I just was trying to create a cohesive composition and the colors that work well together. But of course I use some more muted and lighter colors sort of in the middle of my composition because that's where it was going out into the distance more, and on the side I was adding a little bit of the darker shadows under the leaves and around the river just to bring it closer and give it a little bit of pop. So there's not that much to my painting approach that is different outside than inside. And well, bear in mind this is my very first gouache plein air, so I'm sure there are things that I'm gonna improve on in the future. And my advice would be just to keep it simple, I guess. Don't try to complicate it. Take just a few tubes of paints and take the supplies that you already have. You don't need the fancy plein air easel or anything like that. I like personally to keep it simple because then I'm not pressured to create something beautiful or amazing. I just treat it as another sketching session. Here I struggle a little bit with the fine lines on the bridge because I usually like to keep my paint fairly thick, and once you start creating these nice long thin lines, the thick paint just doesn't stretch that good, so you have to water it down a little bit more if you feel like you're getting a dry brush very soon. So for all of my brushwork, I use just regular craft brushes. I'm not investing into any expensive brushes for gouaches because I feel like gouache ruins my brushes very soon. So I think I use only 3 brushes for this tutorial, and they worked fine for me. And I've actually added a little bit of the curvature to that bridge. It was perfectly straight in real life, and I just wanted to create a more interesting design. So I just used my artistic license and added a little bit of the curve to it. And you can see that I'm going back and forth as I'm developing my colors, because I'm trying to just see how the colors are working together. And since everything is green, so the only way I'm showing distance is by varying the colors of green. So I'm muting down and lightening some of the colors that are going sort of further in distance, but also trying to put some of the spots of the lighter color to create sort of the space between the trees, and to show that it's not just a blob of green color, there's some variety in different trees and different plants. And you can always work with what you have. You don't have to get so many different colors, because sometimes I even feel like that's what I struggle, because I like having variety, and I just end up getting so excited about different mixes that I can make that I then struggle to keep it all united and organized. Well, I do like to reuse the mixes that I make in sort of in different spots on the painting to keep it more unified, and see me go and sort of back and forth from the foreground and into the background. And even though the background has a little bit of the different tonal range. Oh, we saw some geese fighting. I missed the most exciting part before I moved the camera. And actually at some point into the painting, kind of in the middle, I stopped looking at the reference and I start working on what looks best on my painting. And there's just so much going on outside that I cannot physically fit it into my sketch, neither do I need to include it in my sketch. So I was looking at first to get the reference for my greens and for overall the mood of the sketch, but once I had my major shapes and colors laid out, I could pretty much just look into the painting and work from there. And this is basically what the plein air painting is for, is that you go outside to get just the feel of the place that you're visiting, and then you can come back to the studio and improve on that sketch and create a completed painting after that sketch. Because a photograph is a great reference for basic compositions, and just to get your perspective right, if you're using the camera correctly. Of course, if you're using a certain lens and if you zoom out, that you might get some distortion, and you would have to use the apps or any kind of image processing software to correct the distortions. But if you're using your iPhone, then I suggest that you simply zoom in, and on your picture you try, on the setting that you're trying to take a picture of, and that generally tends to correct that distortion in the line. Or if you're using camera with the camera lens, use 50 millimeters or higher, and that would lead to a more kind of natural angles. But other than that, the camera doesn't really help you that much with your painting. If you want to paint at home, it's fine, but I highly suggest to get just at least a few colors on the paper while you're on location. And it just makes such a great difference, because your shadows are gonna look more developed and more dynamic, and your highlights are gonna have a greater variety of colors, and you just see the distance and you perceive all of the objects more naturally when you're looking at them directly on location rather than from a photograph. I know it doesn't always happen that to be a perfect day and a perfect weather, but it also helps you to capture the weather however it is that day. You know, if I was lucky to have a sunny day, but if it was a cloudy day, I would have a different mood for my painting, and I would be able to capture different colors on the same location. And here I'm adding a few sky holes into my left side because it just felt like really heavy on that side. And for my sky, I used to use Prussian blue and white a lot, but recently I tried Cerulean blue, which is basically just a phthalo blue with white, and with adding just a little bit of white, I find like it creates really nice color for sunny days. And when you mix strong colors like blue or red with white, remember that these colors are much more saturated and stronger than white. So if you want to avoid wasting paint, just think ahead of what proportion of these paints do you need in the mix. So if I'm mixing the light blue for the sky, I'm obviously gonna need just a little bit of blue so that I'm not adding too much blue and then have to overcompensate that with even more of the white and wasting too much of the white paint. And if you're creating darker colors, you can even reuse some of the lighter mixes to lighten them up. For example, for this tree branch, I was using a little bit of lighter mix for the thinner branches. So I was just reusing the colors that I already had mixed up on my palettes. They were just a little bit lighter and adding them to my dark colors that I used for the branches. And that way you can preserve some of your colors that you have from out of the tube, and you can save them for other mixes, or you just don't have to put so much color on your palette and save some of the paint, because gouache paint pretty much dries up after this, so you cannot reuse it and reactivate it, especially if you have acrylic gouache. Mine is just regular water-based gouache, it's not acrylic. So for the branches, I've used, I think, raw umber, Prussian blue, and some other earth colors like yellow ochre and burnt sienna, but I've struggled a little bit with adding lightness to them and adding these highlights that I was seeing, because they were just blending in with the lighter background that I already had. And it's just the way my painting worked out, because my lighter part was in the middle of the painting, so I just struggled with adding highlights that would show up over that area. But I feel like it worked anyway, and I just like the overall contrast between that metal bridge and this natural organic structure of the trees that were overlapping that bridge and kind of creating a completely different feel, and just different lines and angles and shapes. I feel like they contrasted well and created a better composition that way. Overall, I feel very happy with my Gouache Plein Air session. I've definitely learned a lot. I learned to work faster and also simplify, because the lighting was changing and I didn't have that much time to work on the painting. I was also continuously distracted by making sure my son doesn't end up in water, and in general, if you know 6-year-olds, then you know there's a non-stop moving machines, so my head was moving around 360 and I was looking at him more than I was looking in the sketchbook. But I feel like that's what plein air sessions are about. You just learn to be in the moment, no matter how chaotic or messy that moment might be. You just take it for what it is and you work with what you have. You will have plenty of chances to have nice and quiet sessions in the studio when you're warm and nice and comfortable, but it's definitely great to challenge yourselves and just throw yourselves out there and learn from what works and what doesn't work, and don't get too upset if something doesn't turn out good. It's a lesson. You learn from it and you will do better the next time. So here's a closer look at the finished painting, and I really like it. I like how it turned out. Here's all of my supplies. I was lucky to be sitting the whole time, so I didn't have to hold them, and I was able to just lay them around me. And here's our beautiful bridge and our beautiful park. It was a good day. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed this new format, and let me know if you want to see more of these outdoor sessions. If you like it, give me a thumbs up, subscribe, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!